In the desolate, windswept heart of the remote mountains, where the ancient earth whispered secrets only the stones could hear, and the sky stretched an indifferent, endless canvas above, a lone sentinel stood vigil. His post was a mining company outpost, a stark cluster of concrete and steel buildings dwarfed by the imposing, jagged peaks that clawed at the clouds. Here, amidst the profound solitude, his days and nights had settled into a monotonous rhythm of patrols, the hum of distant machinery, and the chilling silence that only true wilderness could offer. For weeks, this quiet solitude had been his constant companion, a predictable backdrop to his solitary existence. Until one fateful evening, the very ground beneath his feet, the ancient bedrock he had come to trust, began to tremble with an insidious, unfamiliar tremor. It began subtly, a familiar shiver, a fleeting jolt, easily dismissed as a minor tremor, common enough in this seismically active region. He'd felt them before, countless times, but this was different. This wasn't the sharp, decisive jolt of a natural quake. No, this was an unsettling hum that vibrated through the very soles of his boots, a low, guttural growl that rose from the earth's deepest abysses. The shaking intensified, not in unpredictable spasms, but with an unnatural, pulsating rhythm, like a monstrous heart beating beneath the planet's crust. It felt as if the very world were drawing a ragged, terrified breath, exhaling a wave of palpable dread that prickled the hairs on his arms. The initial unease morphed into a cold dread as the silence that had always dominated these mountains now felt pregnant with an unspoken threat, a suffocating vacuum before an unimaginable storm. The distant peaks seemed to lean in, silent witnesses to an awakening horror. Then, with a soundless, terrifying rending, the sky began to unravel, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. Impossible, jagged cracks like wounds torn into the very fabric of existence appeared high above the mountain peaks. From these widening fissures, an inky blackness, a deeper, more profound void than any night, began to leak. It was a monstrous, amorphous mass, impossibly vast, that bled into the visible spectrum, slowly, inexorably, blotting out the last vestiges of the fading twilight. This wasn't a storm cloud, nor smoke, nor any earthly phenomenon. It was a living shadow, a cosmic horror of indescribable proportions, its form shifting and contracting like a gargantuan, dying leviathan writhing in unimaginable agony. As it swelled, consuming the last sliver of natural light, a total eclipse descended upon the valley, plunging the world into an abyssal, unnatural, and suffocating darkness. The air grew heavy, oppressive, stealing his breath, as if the very atmosphere itself was being crushed by the entity's immense, unseen weight. The world that had moments ago been merely trembling now felt as though it was silently screaming. The impact was not merely destructive. It was apocalyptic. A monumental leg, an appendage of this celestial horror, if such a word could even begin to describe the grotesque limb. Slammed into the valley floor with the raw, unbridled force of 1,000 bombs detonating simultaneously. The ground bucked and roared in protest, the very mountains groaning under the unimaginable strain. Structures that had stood for decades disintegrated in an instant, reduced to dust and shrapnel. Power lines snapped like brittle threads, their brief, desperate sparks swallowed by the engulfing darkness, plunging the entire region into an even deeper, more profound blackness. The air shrieked, not with wind, but with the sound of displaced force, of matter being violently torn apart. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the world screamed. A cacophony of breaking stone, collapsing steel, and the distant, dying echoes of man-made structures. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, a chilling, profound silence descended, broken only by the settling dust, the whispering echoes of destruction, and the security guard's own ragged, terrified breaths. He was alone, utterly alone, in a world that had just been torn asunder. As if the devastation wasn't enough, as if the raw, physical destruction wasn't a sufficient horror, an insidious crimson rain began to fall. It wasn't water. No, this was a thick, viscous liquid, the color of fresh, arterial blood, splattering against the reinforced walls of his concrete sanctuary. It coated everything it touched, turning the already ruined landscape into a grotesque, hellish canvas. The dust-choked air grew heavy with a metallic, coppery scent, the nauseating odor of old blood and something unspeakably alien. Each drop seemed to land with an unnatural weight, an almost deliberate intent. The terrifying silence that had followed the impact shattered once more, this time by the soft, sickening patter of the crimson downpour, a sound that quickly escalated into a steady drumming, a macabre rhythm against the unyielding concrete of his hut. It was a rain from a nightmare, a direct transfusion from the veins of some cosmic abomination, and it stained everything with its horrifying truth. And then, from the blood-red sky, they came. Not birds nor debris, but something far, far worse. Disembodied heads, thousands of them. Their forms were spectral, translucent, yet horrifyingly, undeniably real, with eyes that glowed an unnatural, searing yellow, like malformed embers from a dying star. They drifted downwards, slowly, inexorably, their mouths agape in an eternal, horrifying rictus of agony. They screamed, but no sound escaped their ethereal lips. Their torment was a silent, visual symphony of despair. They descended to within feet of the earth, their yellow eyes fixing on unseen points, their faces contorted in unspeakable torment. Each one seemed to be a distilled essence of pure suffering. And then, as if pulled by an unseen, cruel puppeteer, they ascended once more, dissolving back into the crimson maelstrom above, only to be replaced by more and more in a never-ending cycle of silent, horrifying descent and ascent. The guard watched, transfixed, his mind struggling to reconcile this impossible reality with any semblance of sanity. He was witnessing a nightmare made manifest, a silent opera of cosmic anguish. But the true terror, the one that would forever scar the mind, the one that broke the last fragile chains of his sanity, was not visual. It was auditory. From the depths of the valley, a sound unlike any other began to rise, a sound that dwarfed the earlier cacophony of destruction. It was the collective screams of millions, a symphony of absolute, unadulterated terror. The sound of humanity unraveling, of sanity shattering, of every last vestige of hope being brutally extinguished. He had no way of knowing how far it carried, how many souls contributed to this horrifying chorus, but it was omnipresent, overwhelming. It reached what the guard would later, in his fragmented thoughts, refer to as their terminal freakout point. It wasn't just noise, it was an agonizing pressure against his eardrums, a vibration that resonated deep within his bones, shaking his very soul. He clapped his hands over his ears, pressing down with desperate force, but it was futile. The screams permeated his skull, echoing in the hollow chambers of his mind, a relentless, deafening testament to the end of the world and the end of humanity's collective sanity. It was the sound of a species breaking. For the next week, time ceased to have meaning. The security guard existed in a purgatory of relentless isolation, trapped in his concrete hut, which had transformed from a refuge into a desolate, claustrophobic tomb. Outside, the green light waves, pulsing with an insidious, almost rhythmic malevolence, became a constant, sickening presence, filtering through the reinforced window, painting the interior in a perpetual, unsettling glow. And the screams, the terrifying, soul-rending screams from the sky, did not cease. They grew more frequent, more desperate, more piercing, pushing the boundaries of what a human mind could possibly endure. Each wail felt like a physical blow, a hammer against the inside of his skull. He sat inside, rationing meager supplies, haunted by the specter of starvation, but even more so by the phantom screams that echoed in his ears, even in moments of quiet. Sleep became a fragile, terrifying escape, often broken by vivid nightmares that mirrored the reality outside. He spoke to no one, saw no one. The silence, when the screams momentarily subsided, was even worse, a pregnant pause before the next wave of auditory torment. He was alone with the apocalypse, and the apocalypse was slowly, deliberately consuming his mind. Driven by a grim, desperate need for understanding, or perhaps a subconscious, terrifying desire for the absolute end, the guard finally ventured out from the dubious safety of his concrete prison. The air, though no longer raining blood, still smelled of metal and ash, a lingering testament to the devastation. The valley was a ruin, a monument to an unfathomable cataclysm. Twisted metal skeletons of buildings clawed at the sky, concrete structures lay shattered like broken teeth, and the ground itself was a festering wound, stained with the dried, dark crimson of the infamous rain. In the distance, the colossal black entity still loomed, a permanent, malignant scar against the bruised, perpetual twilight sky, its form now less defined, more like a lingering shadow, but no less menacing. As he stood, a solitary, insignificant figure amidst the overwhelming desolation, gazing at the ravaged landscape, the very air around him shimmered, a strange distortion in his peripheral vision then, directly ahead. And then, he saw it, a final, horrifying vision, not of the distant cosmic horror, but of a terror intensely personal, his own face, distorted in a silent, agonizing scream, with those dreadful, glowing yellow eyes that he had seen on the descending heads. It descended rapidly from the sky, rushing towards him, growing larger, consuming his vision. His own face, screaming. A blinding, searing flash of yellow light erupted, pure, absolute, overwhelming, engulfing everything, and then, nothing. He awoke with a sharp, ragged gasp in his own apartment. The familiar sounds of city life filtered through the window, distant sirens, the murmur of traffic, the indistinct hum of human activity. It was over, it seemed. The apocalypse, the screams, the crimson rain, the silent, terrifying faces, all of it had been a dream. A horrific, hyper-realistic nightmare. But the lingering certainty, the indelible, searing mark of the crimson downpour and the screaming heads, remained etched, not just upon his soul, but within the very fabric of his consciousness. He ran his hand over his face, felt the normal stubble, the cool air. The world outside appeared normal, bustling, yet, to his haunted, changed eyes, something had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. The crowds on the street seemed thinner, their faces less vibrant, their movements strangely subdued. A silent, knowing glance exchanged with a stranger on the sidewalk, a shared tremor of recognition he knew. Others, too, were beginning to remember. The subtle shifts in the rhythm of the city, the muted responses of people, the unstated understanding in their eyes. It all pointed to a collective awakening. The apocalypse hadn't been a dream, it had happened. And the terrifying possibility of another terminal freakout point for humanity, another collective shattering, was no longer a distant threat, but a ticking clock. The fear was no longer of what had happened, but of the silent, insidious knowledge that it could happen again, and this time, no one would be truly surprised. The world was normal, but humanity was irrevocably broken.